All right, today we're going to work with the principles of design. And if you'll remember, I told you before that the elements are like the tools that you need to play a sport. I use the analogy of baseball. So in baseball, you have to have a bat, a ball, a glove, bases, etc. Those are your elements. Those are the things you have to have in order to put it together. The principles are like a pitcher who can take one baseball and throw rise ball, slider, slow, fast pitch, whatever. So the equipment that you have to create art are the elements, and how you use those elements then is the principles. Okay, our key terms: composition, unity, and variety, both visual and conceptual. We have balance, visual, weight, symmetry, asymmetry, emphasis and subordination. Focal point supposed to come over here under emphasis and subordination. Scale and proportion, and rhythm. So the composition is the organization of all of the elements. Anytime I ever say the word composition, that means you're looking at a cohesive whole. Okay, so if I were to ask you to create a composition with a house, a dog, and a cat, you would have to put those together in a cohesive, understandable piece, not just a house here, cat here, dog here. Okay, here with Henri Matisse's collage, you can see that he uses a number of elements. He's using line, he's using shapes, both geometric shape and organic shapes. He's using color, and he's using all of those things to pull this memory of Oceania, bring that all together. Unity is a sense of oneness, or how everything comes together, the coherent whole of a composition. Variety or differences. If everything were exactly the same, it would be boring. Whereas variety makes it interesting. So in the Henri Matisse, the unity is all of that put together, and the variety they're not all geometric shapes, they're not all the same color, they're not all the same line, etc. So visual unity is based on the use of the visual elements. They are elements that you can see. They are in our list of things. Conceptual unity is tying a group of ideas together. It's probably more prominent in more modern art, and where people are trying to make a social statement about things. That's probably where you're going to see conceptual unity more often. All right, in order to create unity, you can do some of the basic, um, uh, these would be things that would create space. In the first instance of three-piece still life, because it is drawn, they are using overlapping shapes. They are using value changes to create the illusion that there's form there. On the right-hand side, those columns are actual columns, and the same exact column is repeated over and over and over and over again. So repetition can pull things together in unity. Overlapping items can pull things together and create unity. Okay, in Infinity Nuts, you can see we're using repetition again. It's almost like, I don't know, kind of maybe a leather kind of look, but each of the little pieces is the same color, and they're all connected by the same kind of border. And so that's repetition. Proximity is where they are in relationship to each other in the artwork. So this image by Matisse has got squares that are overlapping, or rectangles that are overlapping each other. We have these organic amoeba-like shapes that are overlapping each other, and some of them are almost touching but not quite, and some are a little further apart. And so proximity, where you place the pieces together, also helps to create unity. If this were an image of nothing but brown M&Ms, it would be boring. And so even though the shapes are all the same, we have different colors. They're not all, facing front, like laying down. They're facing different directions. So that creates some variety there. Andy Warhol's Marilyn does something similar. He uses the same image of Marilyn Monroe over and over and over and over again. But as this is a screen print, he was able to do some manipulations with it. So the portion of it on the left, it's all the colors, and those are exactly the same. On the right, however, he's using blacks and whites, and you can see that we have varying degrees of clarity, I guess, to the images. So the second column they're kind of smeary. You get out here to the very last column, and they're very, very light, almost non-existent. So that also creates variety. When we talk about balance, we're talking about a visual weight. Probably the best example is if you ever played on a seesaw or a teeter-totter. If you got a big kid on one end and a little bitty kid on the other, the teeter-totter is not going to be very fun. And balance is that same way. In the visual arts, visual weight refers to whether a figure feels like it's light or feels like it's dark. And when visual weight's equally distributed, then it's felt to be visually equal, and it's pleasing to look at. Most people don't like to look at things that are visually out of weight because it's uncomfortable. So here we see a sculpture of Red Cube, obviously. And in this case, it's a sculpture that's actually balancing on one corner of itself. And because that's happening, we see that it's visually balanced. On the right-hand side is a scale like you might use for science or in Egyptian art. They believed that the dead person would, in order to get to the afterlife, they would have to weigh their heart against the feather. And if the feather was heavier than their heart, then they were a good person, and then they could go to heaven or to wherever they were going. All right, so balance, there's basically 4 kinds. You have symmetrical balance, you have approximate symmetrical balance, you have asymmetrical balance, and you have radial balance. And we'll talk about each one of those. So the painting of Queen Elizabeth I, the coronation portrait, at first looks symmetrical. She's centered in the middle. When you look at the crown and you look at her head, her hair, her cape, everything looks like it is the same from one side to the other. However, it's also approximate because you can see she's holding 2 different things in her hands. So she's holding a staff in one, and she's holding a cross in the other. So I think this one could be, you could call it symmetrical, or if you really want to get into this, you could call it approximate symmetry. The picture on the conversation in the park on the right is asymmetrical balance. And we've got the two people. They're actually sitting a little bit more to the right, to the left side. And the visual weight of the two of them is being balanced out by the tree and the lighter areas on the right and the building that's kind of back in the background. But it still looks visually appealing. Radial balance is any type of symmetrical design that radiates out from a central point. So rose windows, mandalas, Navajo sand paintings. In the Navajo sand paintings, there are some slight differences. So this actually is a little bit more of an approximate radial symmetry, but it starts in the middle and then it works its way out. So here we have a little chart of the principles of asymmetrical balance. And remember, asymmetrical is when it's not the same from side to side. Number one is a large form is visually heavier than a smaller form. Number two, a dark value form is visually heavier than a lighter value form of the same size. Textured form, number three, is visually heavier than a smooth form of the same size. 4, a complex form is visually heavier than a simple form of the same size. Number 5, 2 or more small forms can balance a larger one, just like the teeter-totter. If you put another little kid on the side with, you have 2 little kids on one side and one bigger kid on the other, then you can teeter-totter. And then number 6, a smaller dark form can balance a larger light one. I always did a project with students that was just in black and white, black marker. Sometimes we used ink. And one of the hardest things for them to do was to balance out the black against the white. If you clump all the black stuff together in the bottom left-hand corner, the entire composition is going to feel kind of heavy and off. So that can be a little difficult because the black color is a visually heavier weight than the white of the paper. Emphasis and subordination, those are complementary concepts. Emphasis is where the attention, when you look at artwork, where your attention is going to center. Okay, there are specific ways that artists show emphasis, and usually that emphasis has to do with the theme of their painting or artwork or whatever. So certain parts are going to pop out at you more than others. Focal point, that's a specific place. It could be a specific person. It could be a specific color. Anything like that when you first look at it, your eyes go boom right there. And then subordination are less visually interesting areas. The Night Watch is a painting done by Rembrandt, and this painting actually has a kind of a cute story to it. Each of the members, he was commissioned to do this by this militia company, and each of the persons in it wanted to be placed according to their importance to the group. Well, Rembrandt didn't do that. He kind of gave them all, funny little things. And so they weren't real happy with it, and they threatened not to pay him, but he resolved it. So you can see in Rembrandt's, the first thing I see when I look at this, so like the focal point, is going to be this guy dressed in the yellow, because yellow is a light color. Yellow pops against the darker background. And the emphasis is on these two guys who are in front of everybody else. So either they're more important than everybody else, they're the leaders, something of that nature. Rembrandt also uses lighting in a way to show emphasis. So if you notice, the important parts are right around there, and then you've got this one little person tucked back in here that is also dressed in yellow, but everything else is more subdued. And so the brighter color, the yellow, pops out more. The light shining on those people emphasizes it more. The fact that they're in the middle and toward the front, that also creates the emphasis. Okay, Georgia O'Keeffe's Blue One is a similar kind of thing. This is more of an abstract piece of art. When you look at it, the first place that you see is that lighter part toward the center. So you see that lighter part, you see this lighter part right here, and that immediately draws your eye because that's lighter than anything else. But then there's also this darker piece right in here. So as you're looking at this lighter piece, and pow, you go right to that center. It helps that it is encased by this darker line. And so your eye naturally, you started in here and you go whoop and around and around. And so while it is creating that interest, it's also has variety because it's not all the same value of blue. It's very monochromatic, but not all the same. Now, Jackson Pollock's number 5, that one's a little different. There doesn't really seem to be an emphasis. And so in that case, you kind of have to work, I guess, more with a theme with it. There's so many lines going so many different directions that it's really hard to find a centralized focal point. For me, when I look at it, I notice these yellow areas because those to me are brighter than everything else, even brighter than the white areas. So that becomes kind of my center of interest, my my focus. But this particular kind of artwork, you would not be able to describe it with subject matter. You would have to think of what kind of theme is it using. Are the squiggly thrown on paint lines representative of something else? So you can see abstract art can be a little bit harder to come to a conclusion about the context of it or something like that. Okay, scale and proportion, they both have to do with size. Scale is the size of something in relationship to what is considered normal. Proportion then is the size relationships in a whole. So like the human body, you would not draw a little bitty head and a great big body, or a great big head and a little bitty body. That would be out of proportion. Claes Oldenburg is just a fun artist. He is best known for making his larger than life objects. So this is an example of scale. Obviously, badminton birdies are not this big, and these are 20 feet tall probably. And one of the interesting things with this, there's actually 3 of them, and they're on the lawn of the Kansas City Art Museum. And the art museum sits on kind of a long, narrow piece of land. And the art museum itself, the building itself, sits almost halfway. So when he was coming up with this idea, he wanted the badminton birdies or shuttlecocks to be placed as if they were being played with the building itself being the net. So on the other side of the building is another one of them. And proportion is probably the most prominent when we're talking about drawing the human figure. But even if you were drawing something like a coffee pot, you would want to have the base of the coffee pot and the handle and the spout. You want those to be all in correct proportion. You can't have a bigger spout than you've got handle, because we know that that's not going to work. You can't have a bigger handle than you've got a, a base or a body for the coffee pot. So objects and humans all have a proportion. Most humans are 7.5 or 6.5. Well, this one's 7.5 high. This one's 6.5 high. Different proportions. So this one is going to look, if it's 7.5 high, this guy's going to look a lot taller, thinner than this guy. They're using the same height, but they're using a different proportion. In this case, we've got different heights, and therefore, but we still have the 7.5 heads tall. So this guy's 7.5 tall, this guy's 7.5 tall. You're just adjusting the size of the head to accommodate the height. The Egyptians were really good at using hierarchical scale, and that was when you can tell the importance of a person or a thing by how big they are. So in this case, you can see that the pharaoh, who's the big one in the middle, he is of more importance than the woman that's off to the right, or the servant that's beneath his feet, or even the birds and things like that. So he is the biggest. That means he is the most important person, especially in relationship to these other figures. Now, again, in scale and proportion, we have a thing called the golden section, and it's a mathematical way of figuring proportions and the ratio, and it was designed by the ancient Greeks, and they used it for architecture, art, all kinds of things. And basically what it did is it helped them to figure out height versus width and things like that. This is the golden ratio. So you can see that we have got a big rectangle. We have, I would say, probably it's divided into thirds. So we have 2/3 of the rectangle here. We've got 1/3 of the rectangle on this side. Then this one is, that's not quite 2/3, but this part is larger than this part of this rectangle. And then it breaks it down, breaks it down, breaks it down, breaks it down. And if you notice, this portion right here is the same as this whole portion. And that's really about all I can tell you about it, because I've never used it and I'm not super familiar with it. Here you can see, though, how the golden section can be used. It's also called the Fibonacci numbers or something like that. But you can see here how they used this golden ratio to make a proportion between the width of this building and the height of this building. In this case, this painting, you can see this is a lot of stuff going on this side, and then it's coming around, and then it's coming back into here. In the Mona Lisa, you've got a couple of different things going on here. First of all, this first one, uh, when you have lines like that drawn, that's indicating that your best your best placement for a focal point or an emphasis is where these lines intersect. Okay. Obviously, in a portrait, that doesn't work too much well because you can see she's centered, which is okay. She's centered, the head is higher up because you're looking at more of the body. Here they have used that, that Fibonacci idea to get the very subtle proportions to the human face. Usually when you hear the term rhythm, you think of it being more of something that deals with music, and it's a repeating. It's like a beat, okay? And so rhythm in art is visual, and so it depends on the repetition of certain elements, usually shapes, could be lines. You can also create rhythm with color. And so I actually think that pattern fits in here too, because patterns are also repetitions of accented elements. You did those since you were in kindergarten. You did square, circle, square, circle, square, circle, or red, blue, blue, red, blue, blue. Here are some examples of how using objects can create that visual rhythm. In the first picture, we see a whole bunch of kayaks. They are not lined up side by side, all facing the same direction. So that creates variety. It also creates variety because they're different colors. But because of the way they're put together, it's like that visual beat. Kayak, blue kayak, orange kayak, reddish kayak, yellow kayak, white kayak, red kayak, as it goes on. Down here, the colored pencils, there's actually a couple of different things going on here. First of all, obviously the colors are different. Also, the colored pencils are being laid out in kind of a serpentine shape. So this is going up and down and up and down and up and down, both places. Additionally, whenever something is angled, and we talked about this when we talked about line in the elements, an angled item kind of indicates action. Something's going on. Here, we're looking at bars and circles. Everything is made of bars and circles. But the variety is that some of the circles are smaller, some of them are bigger, some of the bars are narrower, some are wider. They're not all set up very stringent, like a symmetrical thing. But you can see you have a visual rhythm with the bars and with the circles. And if you look at them, you can kind of get a beat in your head, just like you would if it was music. Architecture also has similar things. These are called keyhole vaults because they look like a keyhole. And this is an example of looking through. You have vault after vault after vault after vault after vault. And that causes the repetition, which causes your rhythm. So in summary, we looked at composition, we looked at unity and variety, we looked at balance, emphasis and subordination, scale and proportion, rhythm, which is repetition. I could also throw pattern in there because when you have a pattern, you usually have a visual rhythm going on. Now, most artworks are going to have more than one of these. In fact, a lot of artworks will have all of them. So if you were to take, I had the students in class, I had them make composition, so that was a unified whole. They had to use 2 different shapes, and they had to create a composition that used all of those things. So, like a circle, uh, a triangle within a circle within a triangle within a circle. So the composition, it's all together and it's kind of closed in. It creates unity that way. Variety, though, is going back and forth between the 2 different shapes. Balance is asymmetrical, kind of relaxed asymmetrical, because if you split it vertically, it was going to be the same on both sides. Focal point was usually the center part. And whenever you got something that's getting smaller as you go, that's usually where your focal point is. The scale and proportion had bigger circles, smaller circles, bigger triangles, smaller triangles, and then the repetition of those elements. So those are your principles of design.